Welcome back, everyone. We're here with another interview with Kevin. Kevin, thanks for sitting down with us. Today, we're talking about the origins of the Palladium system and how that relates to Palladium Fantasy and then mechanoids. So, our last episode, we talked about you as a gamer, and you were running the massive 26-person Defiler campaign. And you mentioned that you started house ruling. So how did that all start to come about? Because that's the seeds of Palladium, right?
Yeah, it very much is. So like a lot of people, my very first role-playing game was, surprise, surprise, Dungeons and Dragons. And I talked about how my first couple of gaming experiences weren't very good, and I thought role-playing was stupid, and I was going to quit. And then Julius Rosenstein ran me through an epic adventure, and he would then run us, me and like 4 other people from work, every Friday or Saturday. I think it was Friday nights. And it was great. It was a lot of fun. And I'm like, yeah, this role-playing stuff's pretty good. And Julius was really into it. So he'd bring these other games in and show me stuff, like Villains and Vigilantes and Chivalry and Sorcery and this other stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I'm struggling enough with D&D. And that's the thing is, to me, the original D&D, and this is not to slam the game system in any way, shape, or form, but I really struggled with it. I wasn't really a war gamer. There's a lot of things in it that was counterintuitive to me. Like the lower your armor rating, your armor class in their system was, the better. Mm-hmm. And then, when you fought monsters, it was like your level versus their level, which made something else. And I'm like, I mean, I was so bad, I couldn't remember what dice. It'd be like, okay, I'm pulling out my broadsword. That's 2d6, right? It's like, no, it's 1d8. I'm like, oh, I'm pulling out my knife. That's 1d6, right? No, it's 1d4. Oh, and I could just never remember that stuff. And I was more into the story elements and the character. I loved role playing. That's what I loved, was the role in role playing. And so we played just the 5-6 of us for, I don't know, probably a couple of months. And then Julius introduces me to a bunch of his other gaming buddies, who happen to live in the same apartment building. So I go there, and it's Eric Woodjick and Renee Vega and Robin Corona and Matt Ballant and Johnny Hill. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. And I played, my third game master was Eric Woodjick, and he was pretty damn good. And that was fun. And Eric and I right away, he and I just really hit it off. So the next thing I know, Eric is telling me about, yeah, I'm a member of this Lane's Wargamers, but I think they should be doing this and they should be doing that. And there's just so much more. I really like the idea of starting my own gaming center. And I'm like, ooh, that would be cool. And the next thing you know, Eric and I are forming the Detroit Gaming Center. And we recruited a bunch of those other people, Renee and Robin and Matt and some others. And we established this amazing 10,000 square foot gaming facility. They had a bunch of separate rooms and a big gaming library that people would donate, games and RPGs and source books to. And it was wonderful. And I got to see every kind of gaming system. And I got to see how all these other game masters role played. So I started a D&D game, and it just grew and grew and grew, because I couldn't say no to people. Well, at least up until 26 of them. And then I said no. Although I have to admit, there was a big epic conclusion to one storyline, and we got the big room, and I ran 32 people, which was utter madness. And we had about 30 spectators. And it was pretty wild. But anyways, I started playing D&D, and it was going along okay. and the reason I bring up the gaming center again is because it's really pivotal. It's really important because it was like this hothouse of ideas. And because I got to see all these different styles of gaming and people's approaches and opinions on how role playing should be run and their particular style of role playing, I was immediately left with a sense that role playing is very personal, which it is. Mm-hmm. Whatever your style is okay. However you're running your game is okay. As long as you and your players are having fun, you're good. It's a game. If people are having fun, you're doing it right, even if you're doing it wrong, Yep. So I had no sense of I must stick to the rules. Yeah. Because I saw lots of other people who had been gaming for about 6 months longer than I had. I thought they had been gaming for like 20 years longer. I didn't realize how new role playing was at first. So I saw all these other people making stuff up, creating their own settings, creating their own adventures, and changing the rules to fit what they and their player group really wanted. So I didn't think twice about, I don't like this. What if I changed it to this? Oh, I don't like that. What if I tweak it like that over here? And so I just started to change things. Like I wanted an armor rating that made sense to me. So I had it so that the higher your armor rating, the better. I didn't like how dungeons were set up. They didn't make sense to me. They weren't logical in the sense that, in fact, a lot like early video games. Your heroes, whether it's 6 or 8 or 26 guys, come into the dungeon. They pick the lock. They're all sneaky and stealthy. They open up the door. There's 10 bad guys. They charge in screaming and yelling. People are dying and screaming, and swords are clashing, and then they loot the place and like typical bandits. And that bothered me because I'm like, these are heroes. Why are they looting everything? I mean, why aren't they trying to return some of this money to who it might belong to? Yeah. Not that they needed to be Robin Hood and his merry men, but I thought there should be something else to it. Anyways, to make all this noise, they sit there and they take their time divvying up the loot. They're like, okay, that was great. To the next room. And that's what drove me crazy, because whatever monster or creature or band of bandits or bad guys were in the next room or the room across the hall or just a little ways down the hall, apparently they're deaf, or there's amazing soundproofing in these dungeons because they didn't hear a thing. It just didn't make sense to me. So, and I have to admit, the first couple of games I played in too, they also kind of adapted things. So it wasn't just the dungeon, and there was a town that they went to, and there was a place where the players could hang out. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. That's cool. So I started to incorporate these things, and I started changing. When I created my dungeon, I made it so that there was like an ecology to it. So this room was deserted and had been deserted and empty for a long time. But why? And so maybe there was a backstory behind it. Maybe there were clues hidden in the debris, along with a couple gold or a rusty old knife. The creatures, if there were creatures in it, would be creatures that make sense to live in a dark, dank ruin in a dungeon. So spiders and centipedes and maybe a goblin, that kind of thing. And as I started to develop my game, I would run into more and more things that I didn't care for, or that I would naturally just see grow out of my own sense of storytelling. So things like alignments happened. And in fact, back in the day, heck, for all I know, it still goes on. It seems like it went on for decades, was the argument about D&D alignments, and if you could be a true neutral, and what did neutral mean, and you had chaotic evil and chaotic good and this, that, and other thing. And I kind of liked the idea of chaos and order. I had read the John Selesny, or excuse me, Roger Selesny, Nine Princes in Amber, and a couple of his other books. I loved that stuff, and I loved the idea of chaos and order and gods that kind of followed that. But it just, again, it didn't make sense. And to me, I was on the side of there ain't no such thing as a true neutral.
Yeah.
I don't care how neutral someone tries to be in any given situation. You're bringing in your own personal experiences and therefore biases and prejudices. You just can't escape it. So I really didn't like their alignments. So I created my own set of alignments, which I thought made a lot more sense. And my alignments are more like moral compasses.
Very heavily influenced by, I mean, you use a lot of examples from comic books, which I love, like, aberrant and unscrupulous and scrupulous. Like that alignment system is less of a allegiance to a philosophical ideal, and as you said, much more of a practical moral compass.
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, come on, what are you're playing assassins, you're playing knights, you're playing paladins, you're playing thieves, you're playing wizards. I love the idea of alignment system that really helped establish the character's code of conduct.
Yeah. And
you're absolutely right, JM. That very much grew out of comic books. Because you could look at various characters and go, oh, that character's principled. Superman, he's principled. Spider-Man, he's, definitely scrupulous.
Yeah.
Heck, you could even argue almost unprincipled, which is really Han Solo. And I think that's the example used is, the unprincipled character is the guy who wants to be worse than he really is and hates himself for doing the right thing when push comes to shove. But he does.
Yeah.
But he's likely to lie if it's self-serving in a situation, and but not to a friend, or not if he gives his word of honor or whatever. And and he might also steal something or threaten to hurt somebody, which again gets back to lying. He's bluffing. You could argue it's I'm just bluffing, but he's lying that he's gonna cut the guy's nose off, and because he wants to get information out of someone. And I also, when I was setting it up, I was really tired of, it seemed like a lot of people just really played diabolic evil, or in D&D, I guess that'd be
chaotic evil.
Chaotic evil, right. And again, because of, I mean, I read tons and tons and tons of books as a kid, and as an adult. And, I loved nuanced characters, and sure, you've got your Dr. Dooms and Fu Manchus who are out to take over the world, and Ming the Merciless from Flash Gordon, who doesn't care about anybody but himself and is just an evil, SOB. But then you had other characters, even I mentioned Dr. Doom, but actually I would rank him in aberrant evil. Guy who has his own twisted code of honor.
Magneto. Right, Magneto does everything he does for what we, in his mind is a very righteous and noble goal.
Absolutely, absolutely. But if he gave you his word of honor on something, he's not going to break it. Yeah. On the other hand, if he has no respect for you, he'll lie through his teeth and backstab you in a heartbeat. I love those kind of characters, and I wanted those to be part of a game because, again, my focus on role-playing is role-playing characters and story.
Yeah.
So you have the diabolic alignment in our game, which is the guy who doesn't care about anyone but himself. He's basically a psychopath and will lie, cheat, steal, kill to get whatever it is, even if it's just, hey, you insulted my mother, so you must die. Rather than, the other evil character or anarchist character might sit back and go, hey, I'm going to beat the shit out of you because you insulted me or my mom. but I'm not going to kill you.
Right. There's a line I won't cross.
Unless, well, and again, depending on the character, for Ever and Evil, there's a line he won't cross. For Miscreant, there's a line he won't cross until it serves him otherwise.
Yeah.
And I loved these nuances, and we're talking a lot about evil characters, but the same holds true of the good characters. And then there's anarchists for characters like Wolverine, there's a bunch of characters are kind of self-serving and sneaks and cheat. Catwoman is a great example of that. Yeah, it was great, and that was a huge change. Which it's funny, I never even realized how huge, even to this day, to have like a moral code like that to help direct your characters is still apparently a revolutionary idea. Sadly, 40 years later.
I mean, the Cyberknight code, right? Like that in Rifts is another great example of this. Now, so I've got a question, and then just a personal, if you could settle a debate for me and my Rifts group. But the first question is, then you added a skill system, and that skill system was percentile based. Now, did you see that in kind of RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu and like that, or where did the percentile skill system? How did that get brought into the Palladium Fantasy game?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I saw it in RuneQuest. Someone brought in a copy of RuneQuest, and I'm like, oh, that makes a lot more sense to me.
Right. I can very clear. I got a 75% chance in a skill. I know exactly how good I am at this skill.
Exactly. It's very simple. And even if you have a crappy skill level, I've got an 18% chance of doing this, which I think most of our skills are always at least in the 20s. Because I like giving characters a fair chance. You start off, especially if you trained in it, you have some basic level of skill. But even if it was really low, and then you roll percentile dice, and boom, oh, I made it. It's that little sense of triumph that's fun in the game, right?
Yeah.
So you want that, or at least I want that in my game.
So we always debated. So if you were coming into this blind, welcome to the Palladium channel. But when you get a skill, the skill says something like 30% plus 5 per level. And there were knockdown arguments. Do you get that plus 5% at first level, or does it kick in at level 2? What like rules is written in your head? When does that first level bonus kick in?
So in my mind, it starts at level 2.
Okay.
But I have personally played it both ways.
Okay.
In part to play test it, and in part because players seemed like, I don't get it to level 2. I'd be like, yeah, all right, fine.
Whatever. It's 5%. Here you go.
But it should be starting with level 2. Absolutely.
I was wrong, Scott, and I apologize if you're watching. All right, so you've put together this rule set. You've changed armor. You've changed the skill system. You've introduced an interactive, parry and dodge mechanic to it. At what point did you or your players kind of go, "Hey, we're not playing D&D anymore, and this is something unique and special that should be shared with the world"?
It was actually pretty quick. I want to say about a year and a half in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They were like, Kev, we're not playing D&D anymore. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course we are, because I'm using all the, character classes, and although that wasn't true either, because I had introduced some different character classes, and I think it might have been more like a year and a half, 2 years, because I think where we all realized it was different was when I had introduced my version of magic with potential psychic energy, PPE points, and then psionics, because I had 2 of my players, the psionic, some psionic thing had come out in D&D. I don't think it was the psionic sourcebook came out years later, but they had introduced a psionic mechanic. And we were playing through it, and the two guys, it was so clumsy and took forever and didn't make sense that the two players locked in cyanic combat like said timeout in the game and said, Kev, this is awful. Everyone is bored. We have no idea how this is going to end, and we don't care.
Oh, no.
Yeah, exactly. If you need to kill our characters, do it. And I'm like, holy crap. That's pretty
Never something
pretty
you wanted a game designer to hear.
And so, I just kind of rounded off that combat. And then I after the game, I went home and spent a couple of weeks working on what I thought would be a cool psionic system and introduced the Mind Mage. Yep. And I think it was after that and a lot of the way I played my games that my group said, Kev, this isn't D&D anymore. You should formalize the rules and try to sell it to one of the existing companies, which I tried to do. I went to SummerCon held by the Detroit Metro Gamers. They would run SummerCon and WinterCon, which were great. It was a great organization, very strong in the 80s. And the two conventions are pretty big. They'd get 1,500, 2,500 people showing up. It was one of the biggest, gaming conventions, RPG conventions in the country. So I tried to sell my game system to everybody who was there, every game company who was there. And the only one who was interested was, of course, Bob Bledsaw. So, God, it had to be really similar or soon because it had to be 1980, because I only, or even 79, because I only worked for Bob for like 6 months for Judges Guild. And my first batch of art all have dates of 1979, and most of it's in 1980. So it had to, maybe it was WinterCon and in 1979. Bob said, "Hey, I tell you what, kid, I'll give you $500 and 2% royalty that slides down to 1%. After we sell 10,000 copies of your game." And I said, "Bob, shouldn't that slide up?" Like, oh, and he laughed and said, "No, of course not." I'm like, no. And I came back to my gamers and told them what happened. And, I thought, well, I'll just keep it my own nice little house rules. And like a month or so later, I guess they had been thinking and talking amongst themselves. And they came back to me and said, "Kev, why don't you publish it yourself?" And I'm like, "No." And they're like, "But you've got publishing experience and you could do this and people would love it." And I'm like, yeah, maybe. Let me think about it.
Right.
And so then I really started to fine tune a lot of the stuff, because when I say I introduced my psionic system, a magic system, it was not the finished system that everybody knows today. It was the bare bones beginnings of that stuff. So that's when I really sat down to hammer it out and write up everything very tightly and in a professional manner that would make sense. And my plans were to come out with the Palladium Fantasy game.
Yeah.
And I knew I wanted to do it because, that's what I was playing. That's what the game system grew out of. And I really I knew I wanted to have, spectacular art in it.
Yeah, the art was evocative.
Well, because at the time, sadly, a lot of the games, the idea behind them and their production was, it's a game. Come on, you open up Risk. There's not a picture book in it. Right. The rules. It's just rules. So it grew out of a mentality of tabletop war games,
Mm-hmm.
where you didn't have a lot of pictures. It was just the rules. So art was seen as secondary. Well, me coming out of comic books and wanting to be, bear in mind, I'm still planning to be a comic book creator, writing and drawing comics at this point. This has just turned into this great little hobby. And now a hobby maybe I can make a little bit of coin out of. I knew exactly how I wanted to present the book, except from all my research, it was going to cost, between 8 and 12 grand to publish it, or just to print it, and more if I was going to put it in a box, more if it was going to be a hardcover. And fortunately, because I was into books, I knew about what everyone knows about now is what's called perfect bound books, square bound, in our case, sewn and glued books. But in the 1980s, this was a new revolutionary format known as the trade paperback book, and because paperbacks had pioneered it. So I found in my research, in fact, it might have been Alex, because Alex was the guy finding me, Alex Marcinison, finding me all these local printers. And again, a lot of it just feels like fate. I mean, fate that Julius forced me into playing role-playing, fate that I met Eric Wojcik, fate that we started a Detroit Gaming Center, fate that I had such an amazing group of players, fate that it turned out Michigan was the small press printing capital of the United States. So there were dozens and dozens of printers in the area that I could reach out to and get quotes. And we tried a couple, but I landed on McNaughton & Gunn, which was a wonderful family-owned company. And they gave me the price on what they could do that for. And I'm like, oh. So back to $10,000 to print 5,000 copies. Okay, that was a lot cheaper than a hardcover, which was like $5 or $6 a book. And it had to be 5,000 because that's where the price break was for a large print. That would change over the years and as an industry evolved and printing processes evolved. But back then, to get a good price, which in this case, for a big 200 and some page book, was 5,000 copies to get it around $2 a book. Now, bear in mind, that's just to print the damn thing. That doesn't include the writing, the art, the layout. Now, fortunately, I had experience in all those things, and I was good at all those things. So I decided, okay, I can do this, but I don't have the money. I mean, I was saving up like crazy, and I had a whopping $1,500. And I'm like, oh my God, it's going to take 10 years for me to even raise this money. Because I'm working as a freelance artist and trying to get that career going. And it's just going. I mean, I'm your, classic starving artist. So Eric Wojcik suggested, yeah, Kev, comic books. Why don't you release them in like a comic book format? And you could release it as a series. And it wasn't a bad idea, but I didn't feel it would come across right. Because I mean, what this issue is, or this source book is the Men at Arms, and this one is Magic Guys, and there'd be 10 freaking of these books, maybe more, and it would feel very disjointed. So I hated that idea. But he gave me the germ of the idea of, what if I do something else? And
that's where Mechanoids came
in a comic book format, and that's where the Mechanoids came from. But meanwhile, I'm still trying to hammer out my rules and the actual writing, and that took like 3 years to really get it to that point where I was really happy with it. Probably 2 years, 2.5.
So where did the name Palladium come from? Is it from like the Greek Palladium? Kind of the shield of the city? Is it from the element? Like, where did that? And I know there's the Palladium of Desires in the fantasy world of the same name.
Well, so the name Palladium Books comes from both the Greek and the fact that I just loved my Palladium of Desire game and my players. So that was my first big venture into role playing. So that's what I named
Awesome.
my company after.
So for the fantasy game, what were your major inspirations? Because I mean, you and I've talked offline about the Egyptian pantheon being the pantheon of light and dark being so central to the Palladium fantasy game. And then there are just some very iconic classes and creatures that are very much just in the Palladium fantasy, like the Diabolist and the Summoner. Those are very unique still to this day across role-playing games. Like now, some of the gaming companies have introduced a summoner class, but I don't know that anybody's doing like a symbologist like the Diabolist. So what were your inspirations for pulling this world together that you kind of packaged with the system?
Well, so what inspired my world was a couple of things, or numerous things. One was I hated the genericness of all the role-playing games at the time. They're all pretty generic. Yes, D&D was inspired by Lord of the Rings, but the world was not defined, especially when you're talking early 80s, 70s, early 80s. It just was not defined. And Traveler kind of in a science fiction setting, but I wanted to create a very unique, interesting world like what Tolkien did or what Robert E. Howard did or so many other great books that are out there. Like I love Fafford and the Grey Mouser, and I liked I loved Elric and a bunch of other things that were out there. And comic books, always created fabulous worlds, as did Edgar Rice Burroughs, and all these guys that were big influences on me. Even Jack London, one of my favorite books, I think it's called, I never remember the name of this book. And it's not one that a lot of people know about, but it was great because it was a story of like how man became man and like his cousin before he really became man. And so you follow the life of this little, humanoid hominid. And I love that. I love these stories that just evoked unique realms and experiences. So that was a huge part of it. I wanted to create something unique and different. And again, I just didn't want to come out with, wizard, warrior, thief. Okay, dive into it. I wanted to have interesting things. And that's where I often mention research is 90% of everything. I just started delving into to develop my magic system and my magic spells. I started reading all kinds of, I always liked and read books on mythology and legends, but I started reading all kinds of books on magic and fairies and mythology and all that kind of stuff. And grabbing ideas from there. Although one of the things that really struck me, and it's funny because now you can pick up books on all kinds of different magic, supposedly real life magic, and more dynamic and what I call Hollywood. But when I was reading this stuff in the late 70s, early 80s, real magic, so-called real magic, is boring as shit. Because, think about it. Wiccans, Druids, they were using magic, or what they considered to be magic, to cure the ailments and troubles of people in their era. So there are, the occasional love potion, but a lot of it was how to get rid of worms, how to cure fever, how to have a safe pregnancy, how to. Yeah, it was all, and some of it got into, how to win favor from Mother Earth to have rain, or to summon rain, or wind, or calm wind. But I mean, it was all, for the most part, it was pretty practical and boring, which was very disappointing to me because I'm waiting for, how do you summon this and how do you do that? And it's like, no, that's all, because I was kind of into the Spanish Inquisition. As far as reading the history of it, was very interesting. And of course, the torture devices and whatnot. And in the 60s and 70s, there were a number of movies based on the Spanish Inquisition. I remember one with Oliver Reed in particular. I don't remember the name, but it just had this tremendous impact on me. And he was a witch hunter or something. And it was just powerful stuff. And Robert E. Howard had, about, witch hunters and, various magics. And that's the thing too, is I'm expecting like sword and sorcery magic. And I'm like, oh, how to cure cowlick.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this isn't.
You wanted more Doctor Strange.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Crimson Bands of Sidarok and the Hoary Hosts of Morgoth, and
or Lord of the Rings. It's like, where's the Balrogs? Where's the Ring of Power? It's none of that was real magic. Even finding things like love potions. I remember getting so excited because I finally found some kind of magic where you'd take like a dead man's hand and put a candle in it and light it.
Yeah.
And it would help you if you were a thief.
The Hand of Glory.
You wouldn't be seen, and you could move silently. And I'm like, that's what I'm looking for. But that's one out of 100 types of different magic. And then of course I drew from Greek and Roman mythology, and then I stumbled across Egyptian gods and their myths and legends, and it was love at first read. And it was just cool because you had these animal-headed gods, and they were fighting between themselves, or rivalries and things, and it was just very cool. I did a deep dive into that because it just really struck my fancy. And of course, a lot of that leaked into Palladium Fantasy and then continued on and into Rifts. But I just love Egyptian.
Same. I was telling you. So I found the Ennead through Palladium Fantasy, and I ended up getting a master's in ancient Near East comparative religions and languages because of that. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. All right. So you added to our notes here, and I got to ask, what are the laundromat sessions?
I'm glad you brought that up. So, Eric and I were best buds, and we were always bouncing ideas off each other. And we would talk 5-6 times a week about everything under the sun. I tended to be a night owl. So I'm up till, 5-6 in the morning most days. And Eric was working the night shift at the Detroit News, where he was their computer IT guy. There was some particular computer. I'm not a computer IT guy, so don't ask me what it was. But part of it was making sure some, big, at the time, state of the art computer, that was like the size of your bedroom.
Yeah.
Kept running and doing whatever it did, and didn't run out of the little punch card things.
I was going to say it's probably a punch card machine.
And but after like his first half hour there, I think he started at 11, and he asked me to give him a little extra time. So we would regularly talk after midnight. He would call me, or I would call him, and we would talk till 2 or 3 in the morning, and then I'd get back to work on whatever I was working on. And on top of that, I think it was just a matter of multitasking. I'd get a call from Eric, and he'd be like, "Yeah, Kev, I got to do laundry." And his laundromat was in my neighborhood, conveniently. I suspect he arranged it that way.
On purpose.
And, we'd meet at the laundromat and we would, throw a couple loads of wash into the washing machine, and we would hammer out details on my game system, my rules. And those ladies, because it was mostly women there, especially in the middle of the day, I'm sure they were like, stay away from those two.
That's right.
Talk about demons and devils and, diabolic and scrupulous and, armor ratings. And they're having a big debate right now about what kind of sword damage a particular sword or pole arm would. Kev, do you know what a pole arm is? No, Eric, I don't. It's some kind of spear, right? Oh, no, it's not just a spear. You love pole arms. I don't know why. And hardly love D&D Knowles.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like early D&D. Gary loved pole arms, right? You have like 4 types of swords and 16 pole arms.
And Eric loved them too because of that. So, we'd have discussions about pole arms and evil and magic and good versus evil and, assassins and thieves and wizards. And I'm sure these people were like, I don't know. Thank God the internet didn't exist back then, because it would be like, we'd become streaming memes. Look at these two guys talking about, are they warlocks? Are they summoning, who knows? Because, we're talking about summoners and diabolists and, wards and how wards work. We're hammering all this out. I'm spitballing ideas and telling him, what I have. And he'd be like, yeah, that's great, but how about this or that? Or I like that, but I think you need to add something to it. And like one of our big debates was data attributes. How many attributes should there be? What should they be?
Oh, yeah.
It's because there's a lot that goes into games that, you don't really think about if you're just a player. But everything has to work. And my whole approach to designing the game system was, I wanted my rules to be kind of invisible. Sort of like an automobile. So I grew up in a motor city.
Yep.
Much to the bane of my existence, everyone's into cars. And you could be standing there at the street corner and some cool car goes by and inevitably someone will say, oh, I love that 1969 Mustang or whatever the heck it was. Me, if someone said, what kind of car was that? I'd say blue.
With 4 wheels.
Exactly. Or, a 4-door, a 2-door, some kind of sports. It was a red sports car. What kind? I said it was red. Yeah. It's a sports car. So when I get into my car, I don't know a darn thing about combustion engines, how they work, why they work, how to repair them, how to put in a spark plug. I don't know. I don't want to know. It's just not my thing.
Yeah.
I wanted my role-playing rules to work a lot like that. I wanted them, when I get into my car, I want to put in my key, turn the ignition, and it goes.
So, yeah.
I wanted my rules to more or less be that same kind of thing. I wanted it to address a lot of mechanical issues that were important for the smooth running of this game. But I just wanted people to have to put in their key, turn it, and you're off to the races. So that was my approach. And so Eric was always a great sounding board for is it doing the job? And then obviously I play test the shit out of it with the defilers, but Eric was great to help me fine tune things or point me in different directions if I needed it, and vice versa. I mean, we were always talking about, he always had 9 million different games he was working on, and sadly, most of them never got published because he was always working on 9 million different games, and then something new would give him a new idea, and it's like, yeah, Kev, I got this great new idea, and it's like, how about Aliens Among Us? How about Entropy? How about Hell? He had all these cool things. Hellstorm. It's like, oh yeah, I'll get to that, but here's this new idea, and it's like, oh, yeah,
squirrel.
Yeah, basically.
Well, all right. So to wrap, you mentioned that you weren't able to find a publisher for Palladium, and you had a very clear goal in mind when it actually came to publication on what you wanted it to look like. And so in our next interview, we're going to talk about kind of the little sidetrack you took into mechanoids, which gave you what you got, what you needed capital wise to kind of get Palladium done. But something that's unique to Palladium books to this day, in all of your books, is the warning that's on the front, the print page inside. Right. If anybody's ever cracked open a Rifts book, right, you've got the warning of violence, magic, and the supernatural. Where did that come from? Why do you still include it? What were your thoughts behind that? Because that seems foundational to the Palladium world as well.
Yeah, I don't think we put the first one in until, I don't remember if it was Ninja Turtles or just prior to that.
Okay.
So early on, I started
early on, yeah.
In 1981, and Turtles came out in 85. But what was happening was something that is generally referred to as the Satanic Panic. And the Satanic Panic was kind of crazy because various religious groups and social groups decided that D&D was evil, and that D&D, the magic system, was real. And if you did some of these incantations or ritual, which I didn't even have rituals in there, it wasn't even in there, that you could actually summon Beelzebub and Asmodeus and all this stuff, and that you should not let your children play it. And I even actually personally saw an episode of the 700 Club, and again, not to brag on them or anyone's religious beliefs, but they claimed they were doing a book burning, something that rubs me the wrong way immediately. And they threw in Dungeons and Dragons core rule, the player's guide, the monster manual, and whatever. And a puff of smoke came out in the shape of a demon's face. And I'm like, ay.
Yeah, I know.
But it was so prevalent. And then it wasn't just religious people fearful for their children. And that was the whole pitch, is that, oh my gosh, we got to protect our kids from, turning into delinquents or summoning Satan or, whatever the case may be. There was also another portion of academics, I guess I would call it, including like some psychiatrists who claimed that players of role-playing games, so all your role player out there, beware.
Yeah.
That players of role-playing games, especially youngsters, could not tell the difference between that world and reality. And some people, and there was a 60-minute thing, and I think there's something Mothers Against D&D.
Yeah, man.
MADD. Where, and again, my heart goes out to that mother who founded this, but her child killed himself. And, my personal opinion is that, whenever someone dies, and especially when someone kills himself, it's horrific. And you want to know why. Why did this happen? And there's probably lots of reasons. This poor kid was suffering from who knows what, bullying or, self-esteem issues or, who knows what. I don't want to speculate, but the mother decided it was Dungeons and Dragons because after he died, she's going through his stuff and she finds, a dozen or more D&D books. And starts talking to friends, and her son was really into it. As every gamer knows, they usually get obsessively into their games.
Yeah, no, especially early on.
I mean, yeah, I was gonna, and look, I mean, come on, look at the bookshelves behind each of us. Duh.
I don't have issues. I've got whole subscriptions.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And I'm a comic book collector. I mean, I got tens of thousands of comics. I mean, what the hell? But so there was a lot of concerns about it, especially in the 1980s. In fact, Entertainment Tonight, of all places, did a special with Geraldo Rivera. There was a 2-part special called Games That Kill. And I forget exactly when this special ran, but several of our books, we were not specifically named, but several of our books, Palladium Fantasy, Heroes Unlimited, I don't remember if it came out late enough where Turtles and Robotech were in it. I want to say yes, but maybe not. They had a stack of the Games That Kill.
Yeah.
And we were in the stack. You could see the spine, and I think you can see part of one of our covers. And it's like, and I think Games That Kill we already had our warning in there. So we would run into player after player who, were young. I mean, we were only in our 20s and early 30s in the early days ourselves. I think I started a company when I was 24 or 25, 26, something like that. And so we know a lot of teenagers.
Yeah.
And a lot of families. I have a family. I knew a lot of people who were upset because their mom found out they had picked up D&D and they forbid them from playing that. Mm-hmm. And then because they didn't know what they could trust, they forbade them from playing any role-playing game. So we came up with our I guess now famous warning that's in most of our books. And and that made a huge difference. Of course, I can't. There it is. Yeah. There's one. And it just says, hey, there's violence and whatnot, and monsters and magic and the supernatural and superpowers. And by the way, if this concerns you parents, please don't let your kid play this game. Yeah. But please be advised, it's all fictional. None of this crap is real. It's all make-believe. It's all made up. But, respect your choice. If you think this is wrong for your kid, please don't let them play this game. And that as a parent, I would appreciate a warning like that. Yeah. And movies had gone through a similar thing with their ratings of, PG, PG-13, and R, etc. And I don't know. I just thought that was a safe, easy way to put parents' minds at ease. And sure enough, I mean, I would have, God, especially in the 80s and early 90s, I must have had hundreds of people come up to me and say, thank you for that warning, because my mom read it and said, okay, you can play this.
Yeah, and they loved it. I got to play Palladium. I was not allowed to play Dungeons and Dragons until much later in my life.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to, we have outlines for weeks that we're going to be talking about the history of Palladium, some of our favorite games, how they got developed. We're going to talk about mechanoids next. And so just stay tuned on the Palladium channel, and there will be more of these interviews coming up.